Right here I have the shoulder vise for my bench. It's almost done. I just have to glue some things together. Cut out this detail here and tap the 2.5-inch diameter nut. This is a 2-inch diameter wooden screw I've made. Has 2 teeth per inch, and the 2.5-inch diameter screw will have 2 teeth per inch as well. Here I have a 3/8-inch diameter rod that runs through the bench there, which helps keep this vise from spreading apart under clamping pressure. Here I have a walnut chop for the vise. It has a really neat figure in it. And that will ride right here. I have a dovetail joint on the corner here. The tail has a angle of 1:5 ratio. There's splines that run through here, here, and here, as well as up here in the bench as well, and some bolts that run through the end cap into the top. I'll show those in a close-up as I disassemble the bench. To take the threaded bolt out, or threaded rod, you put a wrench on that bolt and use that nut and use a ratchet. And you can loosen the rod. Right here you have the holes for the brass nuts that the bolts go into the end caps. There's the 2 holes. So the bolt comes in here, and a neat little trick for getting those little brass bolts out, or the brass nuts, is you can't really pick at them and pull them out. Your finger can't really reach all the way through there. So if you just blow on it, it comes right out. Here we have a close-up of the place where the spacer block goes. You have the 3 splines which hold the spacer block in. This spline and this spline are glued into the end caps, but they will not be glued into the spacer block except for maybe the first inch or 2. And this will allow the spacer block to expand and contract without cracking, and the spline here will be glued into the spacer block since the grain goes in this direction. I decided to offset the splines because I thought it might make joining it all together a little easier, because when I routed the grooves, say for this spline, when I routed the groove in here, I would also route the groove in the spacer block for that spline. So I kept the same adjustments on the fence of the router, and everything turned out really nice. Here is the spacer block, the hole for the threaded rod, and the 3 grooves for the spline, and that will go up into there. Here we have the position of the splines in the end of the bench. The grooves for the splines are a little bit oversized, which will allow for wood movement. As humidity changes, the splines will not be glued into the top, but they will be glued in the end caps. Here we see the spline for the spacer block. And that, you can see where the holes for the threaded rod are. And this spline on top also goes into the end cap, and it overhangs because it goes in that little bit of a groove in the end of the bench there. So here we have the end cap for the shoulder vise. The screw will be coming in through here. Here is the spacer block, has the groove here, and for the spline in the end cap here, this spline goes into here, and this is the spline for the other portion of the bench top. Here are the two holes for the bolts that go through this end cap into the bench top. And here's the hole for the threaded rod here, and in here. This spline will be glued into the end cap here as well as in the spacer block, but again, it will be glued, this spline will be glued into the end cap here, but not into the groove in here, to allow for this piece to move as humidity changes. And here is where we have the dovetail that joins the two end caps. It has a 1:5 ratio. I have my bench standing on end from when I routed the grooves for the splines that connect the end caps to the end of the bench top. I clamped the spacer block onto the bench using the threaded rod, and I ran the router with the fence along the bench top, and when I did the grooves for the end cap, I had referenced the fence on the top edge of the end caps, and that made sure that the top surface was nice and flush. So here we have the bench top lying down, and you can see where the space is between the dog holes there, and that is because the trestle base for the bench will run in between each of those two spots. You can't have a dog hole above the legs for the bench, otherwise. This is the end where the shoulder vise goes, and you can see the hole for the threaded rod there. It goes through where that line is to this dark spot right here, and that little dark circle there is from a plug I made because I originally drilled a hole large enough to set the washer and nut beneath the surface of the wood, but I realized there would be no way to tighten the nut with the wrench, so I plugged it with a little maple dowel that I made. But I think it might turn out to be a good feature because now the compression from the threaded rod will be exerted onto the end grain of that plug instead of the face grain it would have been. This is the side of the bench where the tail vise will go. Move in and out in between there. You can see where I have marked out and actually cut through these pieces here. I had made these cuts in the bandsaw before glue up, and these chunks will be cut out to allow for the guide block for the tail vise. Right here I have the location of the splines. Whenever I make a groove with the router, I usually mark the ends with little red markers so I can see more clearly as I'm routing. Here we have the slab for the other half of the bench top. It has 7 holes for using holdfasts. And this piece right here is a piece of walnut. It's actually 9/4 technically. I will use this piece of walnut for my sliding dead man. Here I have some pieces of the various leg parts. They're all milled to size, but haven't cut them to length or done any joinery on them yet. Another important detail is that when you make the spacer block for your bench, that the hole you drill for the threaded rod is oversized. For instance, my threaded rod is 3/8 of an inch in diameter, and the hole I drilled is a 1/2 inch hole. And that is because as this block expands and contracts, the location of this hole may move slightly, so having an oversized hole will allow that to happen without bending the rod or splitting the wood. Also, when you make dog holes for your bench, make sure that you angle them 2 degrees towards the tail vise. And when you make a tail vise, make sure the dog holes are slanted 2 degrees towards the bench. Right here I have some of the tools that me and my friend have made for making wooden screws and wooden nuts. These two will make a 2.5 inch diameter wooden screw with 2 threads per inch. This is the tap that you use to make nuts. Has the cutter located there, and you progress the cutter with each pass. And here is the gizmo for making the wooden screws. Basically turn a 2.5 inch diameter dowel, and as you feed it in with a router with a 90-degree bit in, it'll start cutting and catch the threads of the wooden nut, which is on this half. Wooden nut will pull the dowel through and create the threads that you want.